Okay, welcome everybody to today's class. We're looking at the corrections I have made in an essay. Let me quickly read the title. Education should be accessible to people of all economic backgrounds. All levels of education, from primary to tertiary education, should be free. To what extent do you agree with this opinion? Okay, I want to make it clear that primary school is very young. You know, kids are very young at primary school. They leave primary school when they are 10 or 11. And then they go to secondary education, which is secondary school. And then they go to tertiary education, maybe, which is university. Okay, so could you imagine a world where, well, you can say in which. There's nothing wrong with where, which is why I've put in which in brackets. But in which is far more formal. And to me, it sounds far more academic. So a world in which basic education, such as reading and writing, is out of reach for most of the population. Primary education is very limited, and tertiary education is the privilege of a tiny minority. I would say the privilege of a tiny minority. I think we usually do when it's the noun of noun. Now, there's nothing wrong with is a privilege of a tiny minority, but that makes it clear that you think they have many privileges, and this is one of those privileges. But I don't think you want to say that, really. I think it's more natural with I do. So, the privilege of a tiny minority. Now, you could repeat the in which, but the student has chosen not to, because we mean, could you imagine a world in which blah 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 blah, in which blah blah blah, and in which, yeah, over here, and in which blah blah blah. But you don't have to repeat it 3 times, and I think the students made the right decision not to. Just because this does look like main clause, comma, main clause. It's not really, and that's because the in which is missing each time, but it is implied, and that makes this a relative clause, yeah, in which primary education is very limited and in which tertiary education is the privilege of a tiny minority. And so I've allowed the commas to stand there. I think it makes a lot of sense actually with commas, because even though they look like main clauses, there's a missing in which there, and it is there, yeah, just like in which basic education is out of reach for most people. That's not a main clause. Presumably, you have just imagined a pre-industrial world when, yeah, when can be changed to, you know, a pre-industrial world, I would say in which, again, being honest, in which, you know, a world in which basic literacy was very uncommon. Just want to make that clear that quite often where and when can be changed to relative pronouns with a preposition, in which, at which, for which, and they do sound more professional or more academic, let's say. So presumably you have just imagined a pre-industrial world in which basic literacy was very uncommon and education was not available for the masses. Good, excellent. Now you don't actually need this comma here, because really this is 2 relative clauses, yeah? A world in which X and Y. Yeah, a world in which X was the case and Y was the case. And so I would actually get rid of that one, personally. I know why the students put it in, because this does look like 2 main clauses. But really, they're 2, you know, it's a relative clause. You know, it's one long relative clause where we've got in which basic literacy was X and education was Y. But they're both referring to the world in which. And so, you know, I'm not sure I would include that comma, but it is debatable. So you know, I can't say that it's a mistake. I really can't. With commas, you can't do that. It's very hard to say that a comma is a mistake. There are just so many ifs and buts with commas. So I'll leave that one there, but I wouldn't mind if it were missing.